So on the analyzing functions page, you saw this back in Algebra 2. Wasn't the exact same graphs, but you've seen this before. I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes. Go through each of the questions and see what you can and cannot answer. I'll give you a hint. You should all be able to answer letters I and J without an issue, and technically G and H. So if you're like, oh, Miss Tappy, I don't remember, G through J, you can definitely do. So right now, I'm setting a 3-minute timer. Go through as many as you can on this left-hand side. So look at the graph, make sure you're on my right side. So this is on the left-hand side of your paper. Go, 3 minutes. All right, let's see what stuff y'all remember. So you should definitely have G through J done. These were domain, range, x-intercept, and y-intercept. So I really shouldn't need to go through those pieces in particular, but I still will. Okay, so when you're analyzing a function, especially when it says, for instance, find f of 0, what does f of 0 mean? Y is 0? Your x value is 0, so you need to find the y value. So when your x value is 0, look at the graph. What's your y? 3. So you can put it as a coordinate. I saw when I was walking around, I saw some people putting it as 0, 3. That's fine. Another way of putting it is f of 0 equals 3. What that means is this is your x value, this is your y value. Okay, so f of -6. What's the y value for that? For f of 6, +6. What's the y value? 0. And for f of 11, +1. All right, pretty simple. For f of 3, that means when your x value is a +3, is your y value going to be positive or negative? positive because positive 3. So here's 1, 2, 3. On this graph, it's right up here. I don't know what that point is, but I know it's up here. These are all positive values. So I'm just going to make sure that I make a note. This is positive. And what about for f of negative 4? Negative. F of negative 4 is over here to the left. Here's the negative. Since this graph is down here below the x-axis, the y value is going to be negative. Have I lost anybody so far? Next question. What are the values of x if f of x equals 0? What does that mean? When y is 0? Okay, so when y is 0, where should I be looking? The x-intercepts. Yes, thank you, Fatima. This is for the x-intercepts. So all of the x-intercepts that I'm highlighting along this x-axis, that's what I'm looking for letter E. So for my x-intercepts, where y will be 0, that should be at -3, +6, and 10. So x needs to equal -3, +6, and 10. What are the values of x if f of x is greater than 0? What does that mean? Okay, so that means y is greater than 0. So looking at that graph, where should I be paying attention to? Above the x-axis. Perfect. So since it's above the x-axis and not equal to the x-axis, see how there's no equal to symbol? I'm going to write this in interval notation. And when I write it in interval notation, I'm going to start off by using a parentheses. So you guys tell me, what intervals on this curve are above the x-axis? -3 to +6. That's all of this space up here. Is there anywhere else? 10 to 11. So union 10 to 11. If it would have said greater than or equal to, I could have put brackets in. But since I don't have that greater than or equal to symbol, we're just going to use parentheses. What is the domain for this graph? Read this graph from left to right. What's the domain? -6 to what? Y'all are whispering it. I can't hear you. 11. Thank you. And both of those should have a bracket around it. So since it's -6 to 11, they should both have a bracket. What about the range? Read this graph from bottom to the top like Drake. Negative who? -3 to +4. How many x-intercepts do we have for this one? 3. You have 3 x-intercepts. We just labeled them earlier right up here. This means the same thing as your x-intercepts. Fatima told us that a second ago. So I'm going to recopy them. Your x-intercepts are -3, 6, and 10. What's the y-intercept? Just 3. So my y-intercept is going to equal just 3. And you can put it as an ordered pair. You can write it as a coordinate if you want to. It's up to you. Okay, so for this next one, it says, how often does the line y equals 1/2 intersect the graph? Okay, I'm going to use a highlighter for this. In orange, I'm going to graph it on my graph here. If y equals 1/2, what type of line is that? Horizontal or vertical? Ooh, y equals, that's along the y-axis. You just need to find where 1/2 is, so it's about here, and then draw a line straight through it. How many times does this orange line hit the graph?
3.
3 times. For the next part, how often does x equals 5 intersect the graph? When you do that, find 5 on your graph. So I'm going to take my green highlighter. Here's 5 on the x equals. And all I got to do from here is draw a vertical line through it. This graph only hits the green one time. Before I move on to the last couple pieces of this, have I lost anybody with what I just did? I'm hoping you're really like, oh yeah, I remember all this from Algebra 2. Yes, sir. Right here? Okay, what's wrong? So when you have f of x is greater than 0, that means you want it above the x-axis. So what I need to look for is all the x values that are above the x-axis. So it's starting over here at -3, and it's going to keep going up, 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 up. It's going to start coming back down, but all of this that I'm outlining is above the x-axis. Do you agree with that? Okay, so I have to have a value for it. I know -3 equals 0, but you notice how I'm putting that parentheses? That means I'm not including 0 in, or that value in my answer. So I'm not including -3. I'm just including everything above it and in between -3 to 6. Does that make sense now? Okay, perfect. Next time, definitely ask me when I go over it, okay? All right, so back to the last couple ones. For what values of x does f of x equal 3? What does that mean? If f of x equals 3, what values am I looking for? The y values, when they equal 3, what are the x's? You guys look at the graph. When x is 3, or excuse me, when y is 3, what are the x's? 0 and 4. So x is going to equal 0 and 4. What are the values of x when f of x equals -2? Okay, same thing. If I look at this graph, I see the y values here are -2. The x's are at -5 and +8. So down here, x is going to equal -5, +8. For what values of x is the function increasing? Okay, so increasing means it needs to be going in an upward direction. So you guys look at the graph and tell me, what interval is it going to be increasing? Between what and what? -6 to +2, is that it? 8 to 11, there we go. So for the increasing interval, always use parentheses around that. I know you're like, well, Miss Tapia, this is a closed circle. Yeah, I know. But I want you to use, when you're talking about the increasing and decreasing interval, use a parentheses. So -6 to +2, union 8 to 11. And then for what values of x is the function decreasing? Okay, well, we already said this all was increasing, so was this. So this small piece here between 2 and 8, this is decreasing. So down here, my decreasing interval is from 2 to 8. All right, last piece has 2 parts to it. For what values of x is y the minimum or maximum? So we need to look for a local minimum and maximum and an absolute or global minimum and maximum. So let's look at the local minimum and maximum. Local minimums and maximums cannot be used if they're at the far end. So ignore the endpoints. Only look in the middle of your graph. What is a maximum? Does a maximum open down or open up? It opens down. So this point up here, 2, 4, that's a maximum. And this point down here, 8, 2, -2, that's going to be a minimum. So if you're wanting to look for your local maximum and minimums, look in the middle of your graph. Don't look at the ends. Don't look at the far endpoints. So for my local min, we're going to make this, and it says for what values of x. So I'm going to only write the x's. X is going to equal, for my local minimum, 8. And for my local maximum, this is going to be x equals 2. For your absolute maximum and min, you're looking across the entire graph. So now you're including the endpoints. So looking at the entire graph, what's the global maximum? What's the absolute highest point on this graph? Say it again. It's still 2, 4, but I'm only going to use the x value, so 2. So down here, I'm going to write my global maximum is x equals 2. What about my global minimum? What's the absolute lowest point? We can include the endpoints this time. -6. So for my global minimum, I'm going to write x equals -6.